Hey there, I'm just checking on my cabbage and my broccoli crops on this cool September morning. I planted the broccoli about a week ago. I planted the cabbage just a few days ago, but I have to say that I was a little bit worried that I might not be able to have a good harvest of broccoli and cabbage because when I started them indoors, things didn't go as planned. They didn't go the way that they've always gone ever since I started a fall garden several years ago. You see, I start my broccoli and my cabbage seeds indoors in July, and they usually grow out and they're ready to go out into the garden by the middle of August. But when that time came around, the seedlings were very stunted. I started suspecting that there could have been a problem with the seed starting mix that I used, though I couldn't be for sure. So I decided to do a little bit of digging and testing to see maybe I could do something to actually get these crops to grow a little faster, and then also try to identify what the problem might have been in the seed starting mix if that was a problem to begin with. So what I did is I went and bought lots of different seed starting and potting mixes and I tested them side by side. Today I'm going to share with you what I did to test, and what the results were, and what I finally concluded the problem may or may not have been. Now I'm going to share with you the entire process, including a video that I filmed where I just started testing different mixes, along with a results video on how they did. Now if you want to skip directly to the results video, check out the timestamps below, but I just wanted to share with you the entire process just because if you come across a problem like this in your garden, whether it's a problem with indoor seed starting or something else, I thought I would bring you along for my troubleshooting process to try to figure out what the problem was and to remedy it. Thankfully, as you can see, I caught it early enough. I potted the plants up and they are growing strong. I did end up buying some broccoli from my local garden center. That is this back row here and just a couple of the second row. But if you can see, there's really not a huge difference in the size. So the ones that I had growing were able to catch up once I potted them up into a better mix. So thankfully I can report that all is well, and hopefully in just a couple of months we'll be able to have fresh broccoli and cabbage to eat. But first, let's take you to the troubleshooting process and how we got to here. This year I started my fall crops in July like I do every year, using the same potting soil that I sift out into a fine seed starting mix like I do every year. But I noticed that the growth of those fall crops was nothing like it had been in the past. I started suspecting that there could be a problem with the soil a couple of weeks after I planted, when I saw that the growth had seemed to stunt and some of the leaves started turning yellow. Some of the seedlings even outright died. But I think the biggest reason that I suspected it could be a problem with the soil and not user error was because I was actually testing also a new product from Organic Rev called Dakota Peat. What I did in this test is that I did different mixtures of the regular potting mix that I've always used, and then with some of the mixture I added 30% Dakota Peat, 50% Dakota Peat, and the ones that had the Dakota Peat in it actually performed better. You could definitely see that the growth rate of that was much better than just the strict potting mix that I've used for a long time. These are the seedlings I'm talking about. On this side we have cabbage, here's some Chinese broccoli, and then these are the regular broccoli. The ones in the mix right here, this is a potting mix that I sift for seed starting. I've done this for years. I've never had any issues with this particular mix, but you can tell this is really different. These, I've added a new product from Organic Rev that I'm testing out called Dakota Peat. In the middle tray here, we've got 30% of that Dakota Peat mixed in with the same mix. And then here we've got 50% of the Dakota Peat mixed in with the mix. And while, as you can imagine, this was super frustrating, I took a step back and I thought, you know, a lot of you guys have told me over the years, or you've sent me pictures of seedlings just not growing, but having not ever had that experience before, I hadn't personally gone through some of the troubleshooting that I've gone through this time. I'm in the middle of that troubleshooting process right now, and I thought, you know what I can do is I can start new seeds still, and I'm going to be testing different potting mixes, seed starting mixes that I was able to find at Tractor Supply and Lowe's in the middle of August, which isn't really that easy to do. A lot of gardening products are selling out. But I found some organic products, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new batch of lettuce with these different products. I'm also going to use the same potting mix that I was using for the other crops and see how they do and just compare them side by side. So what I've got here is I've got this Dr. Earth's organic all-purpose potting soil. Now, this is not seed starting mix. It's important to understand that seed starting mix is more fine. A lot of times it's a more pure blend that's going to be better for seeds in general. But in the past, I've used potting mix as seed starting mix. I just sift it through a sifter to get the large chunks out of it, and that's worked just fine. I also found this potting mix as well. This is the only organic Miracle-Gro potting mix I could find this time of year. It's an all-purpose container mix, and I'm sure it has some extra, looks like it's got some compost in it as well, so it has a little bit of extras. It's not just a pure medium. And then I got this Burpee Organic Seed Starting Mix. This one's not going to need to be sifted because as a seed starting mix, it should not have the chunks in it, so I should be able to use it right away. But these are the three I'm going to be comparing to the seed starting mix or the potting mix sifted that I have used with great results for years. And we'll be able to see with the growth of these lettuce plants how they're going to do. Now, I'm doing lettuce because it's the middle of August. It's really too late for me to be seed starting some of my crops that are not looking that great, like broccoli and cabbage. I'm hoping maybe if I pot them up, they will start to rebound, but at the very worst case scenario, those are crops I can buy as transplants at my local garden center. So if they don't get to be sized up by the time I need to get them into the garden, then I will go to my garden center and purchase transplants. But lettuce is a much quicker growing crop, and I still have time for sure to be able to sow some more lettuce seeds. So let's go ahead and get these planted, and we will monitor the progress as they grow. The two varieties of lettuce I'm going to be doing today are Monte Carlo and Muir. I'm choosing both of these because they are good varieties for the summertime and for the early fall because they don't mind the heat as much. Since I'm sowing these on August 15th, they should be ready to start harvesting mid-September to late September, and a lot of times we can still be kind of hot. I think the next sowing I do in a couple of weeks, I'll start with some more fall and winter varieties, but these are the two I'm going to be comparing. And also, I planted these with my earlier crop too, so I'll be able to compare the growth with those as well. So those are the ones that I have here. I already have my labels ready to go. The only thing I want to do now is to label which mix is which. Now that we've got the seeds planted, we'll see how they progress, especially comparing to the mix that I've been using that hasn't done so well. I will say that I didn't use any Dakota peat here in this just because I did notice that it made a good difference in the last planting, and I really want to be able to compare each of these without anything else just to see how each of them perform independently. But in the future, I'm definitely going to keep that Dakota peat in mind to be able to add to my seed starting mix because I feel like it did make a big difference. So let's just see how these progress and see if there's a difference between these mixes. Hey you guys, it's been 2 weeks since I started my lettuce seedlings using that side-by-side test with the different seed starting mix and potting mixes, and I've actually been pretty surprised at the difference. What we have here, the strongest flat of lettuce seedlings, look at those roots coming out, I don't know if you can see that. This is actually from the Burpee's Organic Seed Starting Mix. This was the one that had cocoa coir in it, which I've actually heard mixed results about. A lot of people that I've heard says that cocoa coir can actually not be so great for seedlings, although it depends on the brand. And For the lettuce, I'd say I'm pretty impressed with this. Really, really impressed. The next one, I guess the next two are kind of tied, but this one would probably be the best. And this was actually the one that was giving me a hard time at the beginning. This was a potting mix that I've used for years that I showed you everything looked so poor, and remember I sifted it. So I sifted the bigger chunks out of it, but these seedlings are actually doing really well, which kind of makes me like question what I experienced before, but hey, they're doing well. I'm happy for that. The next one is the Miracle Grow potting mix. And again, I sifted that. There was one seed that didn't germinate, but for the 5 that did, they're doing okay. But if you see it side by side, you can tell the ones in the Burpee organic mix are doing a lot better. And then finally, this was kind of surprising. This was the Dr. Earth all-purpose potting mix that I sifted, and those are much smaller, you can see. And I can even feel this. This is a lot heavier than the other ones that I'm picking up. I think this one is just retaining a little bit more water. Maybe that's why. I mean, who knows? There could be lots of different reasons. But I will say that the seedlings that I first started out with, I potted them all up the same day, and then they actually all grew really well. No matter if I potted them up in one of the potting mixes that I'm testing now or what I've been using all along, they started growing rapidly as soon as I potted them up if they were healthy to begin with. If they were some of the ones that were struggling, they didn't make it. But the ones that had a little bit of life and they looked pretty decent, they did well. And in fact, most of them are in my garden, at least from that first planting, they're in my garden now doing well. So that's some good news, that if you suspect that there might be a problem with potting mix or something's not going well with your seedlings, potting them up can make a difference. And I also started getting them into sunlight little by little. I think that also made a difference in the growth as well. So we'll continue to take a look at the differences between these potting mixes. One thing to remind you is that only one of them was an actual seed starting mix, and that was the Burpee organic one. The reason for that was kind of twofold. Number one, that was the only one I could find in August at our Lowe's and Tractor Supply. The rest of them were potting mixes. And number two, I usually like to cut this corner and use a potting mix and sift it out. I find that it's more economical, but the fact that this particular seed starting mix was doing better makes me even question that perhaps. So all of this is a learning opportunity, a learning experience. I don't know all of the answers entirely, but it's been fun to test my theory, to see how it performs, and I'll continue to test. One final thing is that I'm doing this test with lettuce, and lettuce in general was not the one that was having as many issues. It was the broccoli. So it might be worth it to do another side-by-side test with another crop, whether that be broccoli in the spring or even tomatoes, because sometimes some crops are a little less affected than others when it comes to what starting mix they begin with. One more thing, if you have experimented or tested different seed starting mixes or potting soils when you have done indoor seed starting, I'd love to hear your experience. Please refrain from bashing any particular brands. You notice that the one that I used that wasn't doing so great, I didn't mention the brand on purpose, partly because I could never confirm that that was the problem, and partly because it has performed really well for me for many years. It could have been error on my part that I wasn't aware of. So I definitely don't want to disparage a brand if it's not something that I can prove. So keep that in mind, but I would love to hear if you've had especially good experience with a particular brand or potting mix or seed starting mix. That way we can all learn from you. Again, my experience was limited because I was basically at the mercy of what my local garden centers had in the fall, but in the spring, there are different options. I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. So I hope you enjoyed this experiment, and I hope that it encourages you to experiment as well, especially if you find yourself in a position that I did where something went awry and I needed to try to figure out the best that I could. It's always fun to take something that wasn't all that great and turn it into something that you can actually learn from.